Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May the peace, love, and blessings of Allah be with you. Welcome to Ramadan Transformation, day number 20. Today we're going to be talking about the Mufti, the Martyr, and the real you. The real you. Before we can talk about the real you, I feel like we need to talk about the Mufti and the Martyr. So, what am I talking about here? Who's the Mufti? Who's the Martyr? What's that got to do with the real you? The Mufti and the Martyr are voices you hear all day, every day, inside of your own head. And this is what they say. Let's start with the Mufti. The Mufti is like this inner judge. The Mufti thinks it's a real Mufti. The Mufti is just a voice in your head, but it thinks it's a real Mufti. It thinks it has the highest level of Islamic knowledge of anyone anywhere in the world, and it thinks it is Allah's judge sent down from heaven to planet Earth to rectify all of mankind's affairs. And it goes around doing this. You see people and you're like, her skirt is too short, beard's too long, should have it nice, beard's too, goes around judging everyone and judging yourself. See, this isn't just about how you perceive other people, this is about yourself as well. So the Mufti comes along and it's like, you should be praying, you should be fasting, you should be doing everything perfectly, you should be this, you should be that. Should. And that is what defines the Mufti. So this is really what defines the Mufti. Firstly, the Mufti judges. It judges everyone, most of all you. And it judges in a really negative and harsh way. It makes judgments that only Allah should be making. So the Mufti is actually trying to usurp Allah's place. Allah's the judge, but the Mufti wants to be the judge, the inner Mufti. And the next thing the Mufti does is it blames, because it's not just like objective, positive judging. No, it's harsh judgment and then blaming the person for being so weak, for being so poor, for not being good enough. The Mufti is the part of you that blames you for not being good enough, for not being perfect. All right, as long as the Mufti is in town, yesterday's video about you're perfect just the way you are goes out, accept that you're perfect just the way you are, as long as the Mufti has airtime. And of course, the Mufti is extremely self-righteous. The Mufti thinks that I'm perfect, I'm right about everything and you're wrong. So the Mufti wants to make everybody else bad and wrong. So that's the Mufti. But whenever there's a Mufti, there is going to be the martyr, the victim. The martyr is the victim. And the martyr goes through life because the Mufti is there judging and blaming and judging and blaming. The martyr is the one going, yeah, but I just can't do any better, life is so hard. It's hard being a Muslim. These fasts are so long. It's hard. Everybody's calling us terrorists. And, the martyr is the one, it's like the living martyr. The martyr is not a jihadi. This martyr is a wannabe jihadi. And the modus operandus of the martyr is I can't. So whereas the Mufti is I should, the martyr is, oh, but I can't. And so most people live their lives like this. Most people live their lives like there's the judge saying, you should do this, you should pray Fajr. And then the other part of you, because you don't, is it like, oh, but I can't, and it's so hard, and and so you've got these two opposing forces. One is really harsh and judgmental, and the other is weak and pacifistic, and but I can't, and I guess I'll just let life kill me. But none of those are who you really are. So I want to go deeper into who you really are. Who you really are is perfect. Who you really are is Allah's divine spirit, the Ruh. That's who you really are. You are not a human being who has spiritual experiences while fasting and praying. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. That's who you really are. Who you really are is perfect and beautiful, just like this. Just like that dot. But then there's this other layer of you, which is because you freak out and you don't think you're good enough and all of this, and the Mufti and the judge and everyone are in charge, you create this layer around you, which is you don't want people to know who you really are, and you have all of this inner talk and stuff like that. So then this layer here that you create is who you're afraid you might be. And so when I tell people you're perfect just the way you are, they're like, oh, no, you don't know the real me. I sin and I mess up and I do all these things. So then you create this layer. And this layer around you is who you are afraid you are. This is your worst nightmare, is this is the you that you're hoping nobody ever figures out. You're this, right? This is the you you're hoping nobody ever figures out. And because you don't want anybody to, because you think that you're messed up and you think that you've sinned and you think that you have all these things, like you forget, لَقَدْ كَرَمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, we've ennobled humanity. You forget the Quran says that. You forget لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. The أحسن تقويم is your beautiful soul and your beautiful body. But you don't remember that you have this divine element. So you make up all of these things like, oh, I have to, I hope nobody finds out who I am, right? It's like typically when somebody's going to meet a potential partner to get married to, a potential spouse, and people say, well, just be yourself. And then you're like, that's useless advice, be myself. If anybody knew the real me, nobody would want to live with me, right? That's not the real you. That's not the self we're talking about. We're talking about this self, the center, and you're talking about who you're afraid you are. But then there's another level, which is who you pretend to be. So this layer of who you pretend to be, that is, well, you don't want anybody to know this, who you're afraid you might be. So then there's this image that you put up. And this is the only you I've probably ever met, who you pretend to be in front of other people, right? Well, and then, of course, there's the outermost layer, which is this outermost layer is who you fantasize about becoming. Like, I'm rubbish right now, but if I had six-pack abs and I knew all these languages and I could memorize the Quran and all that, that's who I fantasize about becoming. Now, firstly, there's two important things here. That arrow, all of that arrow, everything contained within that arrow is two things. That arrow is your ego, and it is the idea that you are not good enough, right? The idea that you're not good enough is contained within the arrow. All of these other layers are your fear that you're not good enough, right? Now, the Mufti and the Martyr, it can only exist in this space. That's the space within which the Mufti and the Martyr exist. When you take that away and you get back to the essence of who you really are, when you remember who you are, you remember you have this divine element, you remember that, once a year, Ramadan comes along, and all of a sudden, we not only give up doing all these haram things, we give up doing the halal, because it's just Allah's way of proving to us we have this switch and we have this divine quality inside of us whereby we can do all of these amazing things. So the real you is the spiritual being, the ruh. It is thought and consciousness and mind. Now, you can use these things to abuse yourself and pretend you're less great than you are, or you can use them to quiet your mind. See, all of this, it's very noisy. It's very noisy, a lot of internal chatter, but this is absolute silence. These guys, the Mufti and the Martyr, they shout really loud. The Mufti and the Martyr are shouting loud. You should do this and you should do that. Oh, but I can't. Stop bullying me. The Mufti and the Martyr are giving it all of that. The real you doesn't even speak. The real you is quiet. The real you is silent. The real you is the silent space within which all of those thoughts occur. If you let the real you in charge of your life for a week, you'd probably own the company you work in. You'd probably fall in love at first sight with your ideal partner right away. If you just let the real you take over your life for a week. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. This was Ramadan Transformation, day number 20, the Martyr, the Mufti, and the real you.